Yes, good morning. I am live again. Good morning to my AP Euro guys. Today we're going to continue our discussion of, where's the Kleenex? Our discussion of the beginnings of World War One. And I hope that you all take a chance to look at that video that I sent you. It really is one of the best videos I've ever seen about the shooting of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. It was very well done, very well crafted. So I hope that you saw that. But before we go on with that, let me say this about the shooting of the Archduke. So often in history, people say that, well, World War One began because a Serbian student by the name of Gavrilo Princip shot and killed the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austrian throne, and his wife Sophia on June 28, 1914. And okay. But that, and I've said this before, but that would be like, think of this. Let us pretend that in your home, you have a basement. And in your basement, you have stored, I don't know, about 500 gallons of gasoline in barrels. Barrels that are not sealed very tightly. They have open air. You can smell the fumes when you walk down. That you also had 100 pounds of dynamite. That you also had, I don't know, maybe 3 cubic feet of plastic C4 plastic explosive, and and you kept that in your basement. And one day, then one of your bozo friends walks down into your basement smoking a cigar or lighting up a cigar. And he's, kind of a bumbling fool, and, the predictable happens. Now, who is at fault there? Who started that giant explosion that takes out not only your house, but pretty much of the entire block on which you live and your friends? So who is at fault? Is it your bumbling friend who can't figure out it's not a good thing to smoke? Yeah. And so when we talk about the beginning of World War One, that's when we talk about all these other things. The alliances, imperialism, and of course nationalism, conflicting desires. And you know what? Here's an overlooked cause of World War One, and it's simply this: that Europe had not seen a major war literally in 100 years, and because of that, they had forgotten. They had just forgotten what war is like. That war means that not only, yes, soldiers die, but war means that people suffer. War means that normal efforts to feed and clothe and comfort the populace are now directed, I'm sorry, my nose is itching, are now directed towards the war effort. That, young men and women are being called away from their lives. The industries are directed not towards producing something that people can use for the betterment of their lives, but that much effort is directed towards using things that have no other purpose than to kill other people. And the worst part of all that is that once it's produced, it's gone. Like, for example, in normal circumstances, two of the biggest industries of the past century have been construction and automobiles. When you build a building or when you build an automobile, when it's finished, it's still there. However, when you, on the other hand, make a bomb, make a weapon, once you expel it, it's gone. And normally, after you've expelled it or used it, something else is destroyed. I mean, one of the amazing things about World War One is that every spring in Belgium and in northern France, along the Western Front, farmers still come across ordnance being unexploded devices, unexploded mines, things of that nature that they, it's not unusual for those things to blow up, but, they still find them. From 100 years ago. Off the subject, there was a interesting thing happened in the United States in I think it was like 1963. In 1963, in South Carolina, where Parris Islands in South Carolina, there were a bunch of young soldiers who were training there, and the training entailed camping out overnight, and they camped out overnight on a beach. And these poor kids built a fire right on top of where an unexploded Confederate mine was. And it killed 2 of them. And I'm off the subject. But anyway, so let's see, what do we have? Are we ready to begin? Let's see. Well, I have Mr. Textbook, hopefully. Yes, and I hope that you have it pulled out as well. I think we're on page 710, 711. We have Mr. Handy Dandy Study Guide, hopefully. The glare in here in this plastic makes me nuts. Hard to see it. We have, oh yes, hand sanitizer, pen, Kleenex. Did I get that wrong? Are you paying attention? And of course, our Go Juice. What would I do without it, right? Okay. So let's pick up where we left off yesterday. We are on Roman numeral, 13. The second Moroccan crisis. The second Moroccan crisis also provoked another crisis in the Balkans. Italy wanted to gain colonies because of the discovery of oil, and by the early part of the 20th century, petroleum was a thing in Libya, and Italy feared that France would expand into Libya. So Italy attacked the Ottoman Empire as a way of forcing itself into Libya, and also the Dodecanese Islands in the Aegean Sea. See, this is why we took that geography test the first part of the year. That way you know where the Aegean Sea is. Libya is on the very northern coast of Africa. It hasn't moved, yes. But anyway, this encouraged other Balkan states to take on their prior masters, the Ottoman Empire. So in 1912, Bulgaria, Greece, Montenegro, and Serbia all attacked the Ottoman Empire and won. This was the First Balkan War. The victorious nations then fell out amongst themselves over a partitioning of in other words, how Macedonia, the map was drawn of Macedonia, and this caused the Second Balkan War. Here, Turkey and Romania joined the other states against Bulgaria. They then took much of what the Bulgarians had gained back in 1878 and 1912. Confusing, yes, but in the long and short of it, it's just worth saying that there were little flare-ups in the Balkan Peninsula amongst the fledgling new nations there, as well as the Ottoman Empire. And, the rest of the world kind of nervously watched this. But the thing about it was, with these flare-ups in 1912, they had not yet involved any of the major players of World War I. No Germany, no Austria, no Russia were involved. So now the First Balkan War, though, really frightened the Austrians, who were afraid of this so-called pan-Slavic movement, the idea of creating a unified Slavic government, and were particularly determined that the Serbs would not gain an Adriatic seaport. A seaport on the Adriatic Sea, which separates the Balkan Peninsula and Italy. Like I said, geography is important. The Russians, of course, backed their little Serb brothers. which is what they called them. An international conference was then sponsored by Britain, backed the Austrians, much to the chagrin of the Russians and Tsar Nicholas II, whose support at home was taking one hit after another. Now, we've already talked about this before. The Russian Tsar was having a real crisis of PR, public image. And, he needed something to improve his image with his own people. And what he could not afford, what the Tsar could not afford, was to be seen by his own people as backing down to either the Germans or the Austrians, or of course the Ottoman Empire. And so, yeah, he needed something. Albania was also made independent, the other Muslim country in Europe. The Serbs moved forces into Albania, but were intimidated into withdrawing by the larger powers of Europe. Many people in Austria had wanted to attack an attack on Serbia to remove it as a nuisance to the Habsburg Empire, because the Serbs were always, poking and being a nuisance because they didn't like the Austrian presence in the Balkan Peninsula, and also there were Serbs who lived in territories controlled by the Austrian Empire, and so yeah, the Serbs were a nuisance to Austria. And Austria, who was constantly on the lookout, constantly fearful of a revolt, and just wanted to keep a lid on the situation. And the Serbs were kind of like yeast in bread. They were making things uncomfortable, making trouble. Anyway, these demands were resisted by the Emperor Franz Joseph of Austria, as well as Franz Ferdinand, the nephew and heir to the throne. Throughout the crisis, though, Britain, France, and Germany and Italy restrained their allies, although they all wanted to appear to be not too reluctant to help their friends. I mean, yeah, so once again, so Britain, France, Germany, and Italy, they didn't want the big war, but at the same time, they could not appear as if a trouble came, that they could not be relied upon. Okay. The Russians were embarrassed by their own passivity, meaning, the Russians have been pushed around. They had not, forgive me. Russia had lost the Russo-Japanese War and was now being made to look like something of a punching bag to its own people. And so the Russians were embarrassed by their own passivity in the face of Austrian aggression. And the Serbs kept saying, hey, Russia, so you're our Slavic big brothers, right? Aren't big brothers supposed to help little brothers? And their allies were more and more reluctant to restrain the Russians. Austria, on the other hand, were embarrassed by submitting to an international arbitration and were more satisfied with the results of more aggressive actions. And the Germans were also more impressed by this result. It's just the long story short, in the Balkan Peninsula, it's just a kettle and it's bubbling, approaching boiling. And what happens if you enclose liquid in a container and you apply heat to it and it reaches the boiling point? Answer, popcorn. All right, Roman numeral 14. On June 28, 1914, that video I sent you, put on Canvas, is really good. I really think you should stop, pause me now, go and watch that. It's, what can I say? It's pictures. I love pictures. But anyway, on June 28, 1914, a young Bosnian Serb by the name of Gavrilo Princip, who was part of a group who called themselves the Black Hand, although you have to admit, when you watch those guys, they should have been named the Keystone Cops because they were really incompetent. For example, the first guy in the parade who's supposed to throw a bomb at the Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie, they just, He just watches them. Another guy who actually did throw a bomb forgot the fact that the bomb had a 10-second delay. And so he throws it, misses, and then they all took a success or death pact. He then downed some cyanide. Unfortunately for him, the cyanide was old and ineffective, and all it did was make him puke. Then the guy goes and tries to throw himself into the Miljaka River. He jumps off a bridge into the Miljaka River, thinking he'll drown. Only he lands in about 4 inches of water, and he's down there puking when the police catch him. Pardon me, I'm going to have to cough. I'm sorry. I wish you could pause this. Okay, back. So, back to the matter at hand. Prince Sip was a member of a terrorist society who called themselves the Union of Death, or more popularly, the Black Hand. Yes. The chief of the intelligence of the Serbian Army General Staff had helped to plan the crime. In other words, Serbia was in on this. It was generally believed that Serbian officials were involved in the act. Also, after the act occurred, the Serbian press actually wrote articles that didn't exactly express regret for the fact that the heir to the Austrian throne and his wife, who was also pregnant, was killed. Yeah, that doesn't help. Anyway, while the Archduke was not popular in Austria, he would have actually been favorable to a government that would have raised the status of Serbs in the empire. In other words, this guy was willing to compromise. The position alienated the conservative Habsburgs as well as the Hungarians. It also alarmed the radical Slavs who thought that reform would dash their hopes of a completely independent Slavic state. See, there were a lot of these guys, like the Black Hand, who were so extremist that they felt that the only future for them was the creation of a fully independent Slavic Serbian state, and that the only way to achieve that goal was through violence. And they didn't want reform. They didn't want a deal like the Hungarians had, where they had a dual nationhood status. They wanted Austrian influence out of the Balkan Peninsula, and they saw that the only way to do that was blowing somebody up. Anyway, back to the matter at hand. Part F. The attack, of course, drew outrage from all across Europe, of course, except for Serbia. Count Leopold von Bechtold, the Austro-Hungarian foreign minister, felt the need for strong action, but he knew German support would be required in the very likely event that the Russians would come in and aid their little Slavic brothers. Kaiser Wilhelm II and Chancellor Theobald I love these German names, Chancellor Theobald von Bethmann Hollweg promised German support for an attack on Serbia. This has been called the blank check statement. Now, nowadays, people don't use checks anymore. And so maybe you don't understand what a check is, but it's like this. A check is a piece of paper. It's a promissory note, basically, which says that one party listed on the check authorizes the bank to give the other party a certain amount of money. Well, a blank check is a check that is written by one party telling the bank to give the other party as much money as he wants. It's a very dangerous thing. Several years ago, I had a niece who graduated from high school, and I sent her a check, and I forgot to put in the amount on the check. It was blank. Fortunately, she put in some modest amount, but, you know, I mean, she could have written anything she wanted. My signature was on the check. And so that's what, when people call this the blank check statement, they're basically saying Germany was telling the Austrians, we'll do whatever you want. So they urged the Austrians, the Germans though, urged the Austrians to move swiftly, while all the other nations in Europe were still shocked at the killing of members of the royal family. And if they act quickly, it'll be over with, hopefully, and we can all go back to business as normal. They also made the point that failure to act on the part of the Austrians would be seen as weakness. And so they wanted the Austrians to do something. The Germans knew that they risked a general war, but they hoped for a local war just between Austria and Serbia. Some say that Germany had been planning the war, but there's not really any support for that. At the end, spoiler alert, at the end of the war, Germany is going to bear the entire brunt for causing the war, which is really unfortunate and unfair. But yeah, Germany, even Kaiser Wilhelm II, would have liked to have not had this war. So Kaiser Wilhelm II was apparently outraged at the attack on his friend, the Austrian royalty. The Chancellor, however, was more reserved but afraid to go against the Kaiser. He was also fearful of the future. He feared that the Russians were rebuilding and would be at full strength by 1917. And the Russians, remember, and the Germans right now were on different pages as far as friendship. The Triple Entente, who is that? Triple Entente. Great Britain, France, Russia. Triple Entente. The Triple Entente was growing closer and more powerful, and Germany's only valuable ally was Austria, who was, they're kind of like a second-tier power. And for the Germans, think of this. For the Germans, it was dangerous to support Austria. But it was actually more dangerous for the Germans to withhold support from Austria, because if they withhold support from Austria, one day the Germans might need a friend, and they won't have one. And so anyway, so like I said, if Germany did not support Austria, then the Austrians might look elsewhere for help. The Bethmann Hollweg hoped the Austrians would act quickly and that the whole matter would be over before others could get involved. He was prepared, however, for war against Russia and France. But he needed Britain to remain neutral, and he felt that he convinced the British to do this. The Austrians were deliberately slow to act. I mean, the Archduke is killed on June 28th. The first actions of war do not take place until July 28th, a full month later. They did not give their fully unacceptable ultimatum to the Serb until July 24th. You say, what was this ultimatum? Yeah, the Austrians sent a message to Serbia saying, look, we know you guys are in on this, and we want several things for us to go away. And they named several. Of course, they wanted Gavrilo Princip. Of course, they wanted all the people who were in on the plot, and there were many. But then the last thing they wanted, the Austrians wanted to station Austrian soldiers in Serb territory, and the Serbs just couldn't go for that. And it's at that time that Serbia says, "Okay, Russia, if you are big brothers, it's time to be our big brothers now, because if you don't, we're about to get swallowed." So anyway, the Serbs sent back a response so conciliatory. In other words, the Serbs said, okay, that even the German Kaiser thought that the whole thing was over. On July 28th, though, Austria declared war on Serbia, even though their army would not be ready to move until mid-August. The Russians responded angrily to the Austrian demands on Serbia. The most conservative elements in the Russian government feared a war would lead to a Russian revolution. How right they were. But most other groups, the nationalists, the Russian nationalists, the Pan-Slavs, and most of the politically conscious classes in general, demanded some sort of action. The government ordered a partial mobilization against only Austria, which was impossible. Mobilization. Now, see, you'll hear a lot when you study World War I. You hear a lot about this word mobilization. Oh, I hate that. God. Well, I guess it's just me and you guys. Mobilization means that I'm sure you guys are laughing right now. Mobilization means, and I can't see. Stupid light. Hey. Yeah, I'm sure that'll make the highlight reel. Mobilization, what it means. It means that these countries began gathering supplies, foodstuffs, medical supplies, weaponry. It means that they began recruiting, conscripting soldiers and training them, massing them around railroads. They'd be shipped to the front. It was a very, very tedious, and it's kind of like a freight train that once you get it going, it's very hard to stop. And not only is it hard to stop, but if you do decide to stop it, forgive me again. You're laughing, I see it. If you do decide to stop the process, then getting it started, again, is almost twice as hard. And so when the Russians began to mobilize, and remember, Russia has the largest army in Europe. They're the equivalent of the Keystone Cops. You have lots and lots of Russian soldiers who were sent to the front without weapons and simply being told, follow that guy with a rifle, and when he gets shot, you pick up his rifle and carry on. Yeah, so mobilization was the same as an act of war to the Germans because Russian mobilization would upset the timing of the von Schlieffen Plan, which required an attack. Okay, let's go. Von Schlieffen Plan. Von Schlieffen Plan, named after Albert von Schlieffen. He was a German military strategist. I mean, the Germans had known for quite some time that they were likely going to be facing a two-front war. I mean, in our country today, the people in the Pentagon are always coming up with scenarios, are always thinking ahead. What if we go to war with this country? How will we react in those circumstances? Well, the Germans did the same thing. The question was, what happens if Germany goes to war with France on their west at the same time as Russia on their east? Two major enemies on each of their two longest borders. And so the von Schlieffen Plan was like this. Imagine that I used to love to do it. This is what I hate about this virus. I can't, pick somebody out of the class. Of course, I'd pick somebody that everybody, it'd be a funny joke. But imagine that you're at Chuck E. Cheese and you show up, and I know Chuck E. Cheese, right? So you go to Chuck E. Cheese, and the place is rocking, and the mouse is dancing, and you walk in there, and let's pretend that, for example, that you're a guy, and you're walk in there, and suddenly you're confronted by these two guys, and one of them is. Have you ever watched the film The Sandlot? Squints Palladorus, little shrimpy guy with the black glasses, look like this, and he keeps pushing them up like this. Squints Palladorus, come on, you know what I'm talking about. And he's little and tiny, and the other guy is just like humongous. He kind of looks like, I don't know, the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. And these two guys, they get on either side of you, and they say, what are you doing on our turf? And, I don't want to be here. I want to, dance with a mouse or have high quality pizza or something. But anyway, and so, yeah, you come in there and they say, well, Squints Palladorus keeps doing this, reaches into his back pocket and pulls out a slide ruler, butterfly slide ruler, and says, you better get out of here right now, or there's going to be trouble. And so basically what happens is you have to fight these two people at the same time. Squints Palladorus on your right, Stay Puft Marshmallow Man on your left. And if you haven't put it together already, France is Squints Palladorus. Remember that the Germans knocked France out in less than 6 months in the Franco-Prussian War. Now, Russia, on the other hand, much bigger, and Russia has already been attacked on several occasions with bad results. The Swedes did it in the Great Northern War. Napoleon broke his back in Russia, literally. And so Germany likened them to, the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. That very slow. And so what do we do? So the answer was, for the Germans, was that, first of all, you send one army to your eastern front. One army, and in fact, it was the German 8th Army under, I think it's Erich Ludendorff, to basically keep an eye on the border, keep an eye on the German border facing Russia. Now, the majority of the German attack then would be thrown against the French. That crushing blow. Once again, kind of like, you got Squints Palladorus there. He's a little tiny guy, and so you just knock him out quickly. That's the idea. Knock him out of the war quickly, and then you can turn your full attention to dealing with the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man for Russia. And that's the von Schlieffen Plan in a nutshell. And actually what's funny is when the war gets started, it's working pretty well. So what happens is the German 8th Army under Paul von Hindenburg, that's him. Yeah, the German army under Paul von Hindenburg encounters not one but two Russian armies on the eastern front, the Battle of Tannenberg Lakes. Now, the German army actually destroys both of them. The German army turns around, smashes one Russian army, smashes the other Russian army, and then, you'd think everything's fine, except that the Germans were actually very shocked by the fact that the Russians could put two armies on the field. The Stay Puft Marshmallow Man is supposed to be slow. He's not supposed to be mobilized so quickly. And so, the Germans were terrified. The Russians have put two armies on our front. The Russians are getting ready to invade us. And so what the Germans did then, they began taking soldiers off the Western Front, where they were just having a smashing go against the French, where they were destroying French resistance, where the British were sent reeling back to the ocean. And they began taking soldiers from that attack, that advance, putting them on trains, and then sending them across Germany to fortify their border with Russia. And the problem is, it's kind of like, you're in Chuck E. Cheese, and instead of this crushing right hand that is going to knock Squints Palladorus out, you smack him across the face. And now the war just goes on. And here's the most important thing, that Germany, because they have taken so many soldiers off the Western Front, the Germans dig in. In fact, right at this point in time, Germany owns significant territory in Belgium, which they invaded through Belgium, which was a violation, which we'll go over in a minute, and in France, and the Germans dig in. Okay, so let's continue this. Sorry for that, but that was what happened. So where are we at? Yes. Part M. Britain and France were not eager for war. The Austrians had timed the ultimatum, by the way, so that the French president and prime minister were both out at sea on some excursion. Had they been in Paris, they might have tried to restrain the Russians. The French ambassador gave the Russians the same assurance that the Germans had given to Austria, that, if you go to war, we're there for you. Britain wanted a conference. The Austrians said, we ain't doing a conference this time. Sorry. The Germans hoped for conciliation with the British to keep the British out of the war. Ah, yes. Then the German chancellor realized that if Germany fights France, that the British will join. He then, too late, earnestly tried to get the Austrians, to settle, but the Austrians were afraid of losing respect and could not. So on July 30th, the Austrians ordered mobilization against Russia. Germany wanted to wait and let the Russians mobilize first so that it would look like that they were the aggressors. The Russians mobilized and the von Schlieffen Plan went into effect. We went over this already. Now, here's something we didn't go over. The Germans occupied Luxembourg and then went into Belgium, and Belgium resisted. Now, the German attack on Belgium violated the Treaty of London of 1830, which guaranteed Belgian neutrality on the part of the British, and so Great Britain was now into the war. On August the 4th, Great Britain declared war on Germany. All right, last thing. What were the causes of the war? One, German ambition. What were the real causes of the war? German ambitions for a higher place in European order, which is probably one of the reasons why Germany gets blamed for the war. Two, Kaiser Wilhelm II took a policy of bullying as a policy of diplomacy. Three, Germany pushed its only reliable ally, Austria, into war. If Germany had just said, no, you're not going to do this, maybe it could have been avoided. And Germany wanted to be a world power like Great Britain. The Germans also wanted to supersede the British as a naval power, a pipe dream on anybody's level. This forced the British into an unwanted arms race for naval supremacy, and the British then abandoned their very successful policy of splendid isolationism. Splendid isolationism. Germany feared being encircled by its enemies and did not seek serious negotiations to ease the tensions, at least not in time. And that's where we'll end for the day, guys. We'll pick up tomorrow with Roman numeral 15. And yes, I have uploaded your next test into Mastery Connect. And Miss Wolf is going to help me give that to you all. And yeah, that will be your first grade of the semester. Of the quarter, sorry, of the quarter. The biggest thing is, guys, we're learning this as we go along. And so, we just got to learn how to drive the stick shift. That's all. I hope you have a good day, and, keep washing your hands. And I do miss seeing your faces in class. But for now, I'll sign off for today. Thank you.